very hard to see with the lights. Thank you for letting me come in here and discuss today. As she mentioned, what we will talk about today is asymmetric defense. You're probably familiar with symmetrical versus asymmetrical with encryption and that sort of thing. Yes, I know I am. I will apologize beforehand. I taught for a number of years and have a very hard time staying in one spot. I try to, as much as possible, have more of a conversation with the audience. And with that, I would encourage, if you have any questions during this or would simply like to make a point, please do. I do not pretend to be the expert in everything, and I'm very much convinced that none of us is as smart as all of us, which is actually one of the things that I want to touch on today. So I had an adventure getting here. The last time I traveled to Europe, I was not aware that you have to have 90 days of future, your passport can't expire within 90 days of being here. So I learned this the hard way. I also learned that the border police in Munich are very serious about their jobs. Not very scary, but they're very serious. When I handed the guy my passport, I could tell right away when he said that there's a problem, that it was not going to be fun. Then it looked like things were going to get worse, but then not so much. The horse was not there. But it was an interesting experience. I learned a lot about the Munich airport, but then it also gave me some time to think about what we do, in our world. And if you think about it, there are a lot of commonalities with borders and inspection of people coming in, seeing if they have the proper credentials, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot of the same stuff, that we are most interested in. Along the lines of asymmetrical defense, it's kind of a play on the asymmetrical warfare, if you're familiar, which is the use of an unfair advantage by an attacker against a attackee. What I propose is that there is information that you have within your own networks, if you are on the defense side, that the attacker does not know, that you can leverage for your own use. You can spin it so that you have the advantage. It is the attacker who has to, as previously mentioned, has to figure out what it is within your network that is maybe worth stealing or that they're initially after to decide how much effort to put into it. Your knowledge of the protected assets, those things that you would really like to defend is, I would advocate you use this to your advantage. So another way of thinking about this would be the home field advantage. If you're familiar with football, various stadiums, you have what's known as the home field advantage, and that is your field. You know the ins and outs of it, and you use it to your advantage. Perhaps if there's in American football, if you have the choice of receiving or kicking, and you know that the sun is going to be on one end of the field, then perhaps you choose to kick or receive, depending on your placement. So it's using all of those types of things to your own advantage. So here are the three main things that I want to hit today. And as you'll notice, these slides are very sparse. Again, it's not about the slides. It's about us having maybe a bit of a Socratic type discussion. But here are and help me out here, but here are the three main things that I want to get across today. That first, you need to understand, and by that, define your own environment. Study your opposition. The team that you're going to be up against, it pays to know what their strengths and weaknesses are. And then lastly, and this is where it gets kind of cool, and hopefully I can, if any of y'all are consider yourselves on the offensive side and maybe not necessarily within the realm of legality, here is what I've found to be a very cool thing, and that's actively going after someone who is in a network who should not be there. From experience, that is a great deal of fun. It will make you not want to go home at night. It's loads and loads of fun. So, for your environment, there's a number of key ingredients that in order for you to adequately understand and defend your own environment that you need to know. The first is that you cannot do it alone. Just kind of as a general consensus, how many of y'all see yourself squarely in the defensive space? As in you have a network that you defend. Just a few? So everyone is perhaps more the, don't like the word, but quote unquote hacker, the active. In developing a team, and I've done this, in the military, the U.S. Air Force. What you do is you create a team of individuals who may not necessarily be the suit and tie wearing, 8 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the afternoon types. Maybe they're the guys that girls that come in a little bit later, are a bit more loose. But what you find is the same type of mentality that predispositions one toward more of the sexy kind of attack things, or they're the exact same skills that can be used with a team inside of a protected network. So when you're recognize you have to develop this team because you don't know everything, and you go and get those team members, one of the things to focus on is to make sure that they are both tactical, as in they have skills. They can actually pump out some Python scripts to do things. But then they also have the ability to think at a strategic level, as in not getting mired down in the particular thing that they're working on, and actually keeping what the larger goal is in mind. Once you have that team, preferably of a broad smattering of skills, then the next thing for understanding your environment is actually understanding your environment. It's looking at all of the systems and not only understanding the system and its purpose, its function, but then also how it operates within the system of systems that is your network. And if you're looking at it from the outside, it's all the things you're going to go through to get to the point where you now pivot and then escalate out, or do what it is that you will within the network. It's all those systems that you have gone through, and the logging capabilities that they all have, when looked at individually, may not necessarily give someone an idea of what's going on. However, when you look at them collectively, then you can start to pretty easily, and you don't need a super advanced SIM to do this, you can start to link together things that are happening. If you understand what those data elements from each system actually mean. And the other thing to keep in mind with this, though, is that as systems create events aren't necessarily equivalent to meaningful data, as in data about your environment. If I get to the next slide. So, simply because I'm not the smartest guy in the world and I have a hard time conceptualizing some things, when I think about a flow of log data, For me, it ends up looking something like this, where it's a bisection. But you've got down here in the red, consider these like specific hashes or a heuristic signature for a virus detection engine. Those are just, if it sees it on the wire, it's going to pop it. You're going to get that, guaranteed. As you go out in the logs, then you can see things within NT logs, where it's an interactive login by an administrator. They become much more indicative, but by themselves, not necessarily something that you would block on, but with the red. Then as you go out more, then it's more of informative. It's your general users logging in. There may be some linkages to kind of pull together, in that if you have a badge system in your organization, that badge system logs when an individual is inside at a desk, right? By itself, who cares? I don't pay the guys, I really don't care about that. But if I have access to that log, then I have access to the Active Directory logs, and I see that individual log into their computer. Again, whatever, not a big deal. But if I know that, and I see an individual log into their computer, but they're not badged into the building that that computer physically resides in, and maybe they're an administrator, you can start to link together things where, perhaps this guy's or girl's creds have been stolen. That can then escalate into more specific looks at other logs, and you can start to bring things fairly quickly, actually, down into the red area, where that is actionable intelligence, something that I can now go do. I can go verify that is, in fact, something that should be happening. Then you get into an area which is the bane of anyone in the defensive world's existence, and that's white noise. That is logs that are very much just meaningless. It's nothing more than creating inodes on a hard drive is effectively what it means. The ability to identify what is white noise is probably one of the keys to being able to even get into what is informative or indicative. Once you can make that, then you can be much more effective in having your team go and look at logs as just one example and very quickly pull out meaningful data. One of the things that you may find, and it's been my experience, that as you go into a new organization, you have a lot of individuals who are very cognizant of their own systems and very intelligent about those systems. They will know a great deal more about it than I will ever know about the Microsoft instantiation of SQL, or pick your app. But they don't necessarily have the mindset of setting these boxes up to log meaningful security items. It becomes quite simple and eye-opening when you roll into an environment like that. So just imagine yourself. So you take a job working for X company in their defensive sector, taking all the skills that you already have, and then this huge amount of data in the logs where there are indicators in there that are going to show, and I guarantee you pick any organization, that there is someone in the network who should not be there. Think through how you would use Perl, Python, Bash, just pure access to these flat files. MySQL, do some loose linking together. You can imagine how you can come up with some pretty cool decisionable elements to give to someone in charge. one of the other cool things that just is a benefit of that capability is recognizing that there are things that are misconfigured. Keep in mind that some of these logs, you may be the first one that's ever actually critically looked at these logs. It's amazing what you can find. That Kerberos is dorked in a very large enterprise. That the time servers, that disparate organizations within their larger enterprise, the time sources are all different. Not something that's really apparent to anybody, any one section, but when you put all those things together, you can come in and be the hero because you explain why these random events are happening within Kerberos not being configured correctly, and timestamps, to where suddenly you've got administrators being disabled within various domains, and people are just like, I don't understand, and you're suddenly the hero, and it took nothing more than looking at 2 logs. Point being, there's an application of the skills that you have that I have not seen a lot of individuals out there exploiting. To put it in another way, there's very big money in doing this type of thing, right? And you don't have to worry about the cops, the rubber gloves. So once you have a good team, you understand your environment, you understand what it is you're working with. Here's the third part, the third piece of the larger setup, if you will. And that's setting a path up for success. So, for instance, when you're looking at the logs, you have to plan for how you're going to respond to finding the adversary within your network. It's not the time to plan when you actually find it. Because, as you can well imagine, when you go into your boss's office and say that entity X is in our network, and here's the files I found, here's some encrypted data that's being exfilled, et cetera, that boss isn't going to think about it being as cool as you think about it. Like, yeah, man, I freaking figured out how to de-encode that data. I know exactly what it is that they're pulling out and all that. All they're going to think is, holy crap, we've been owned, and how do I not lose my job, right? So it behooves you, as someone who's protecting their boss, and therefore yourself, to think through how this is actually going to go down. So in your organization, who would you notify? Are you under the auspice of a CERT? Do you have regulatory compliances that you must meet? In that, if you're PCI DSS, then perhaps certain types of infiltrations must be notified up, et cetera. Keep those things in mind as you and your team are doing your day-to-day business, so that you can very quickly hand your boss the information of, here's the entity that's in our network, here are the things that I found, here is the report that's going to go up to agency whatever, so that it's all wrapped up nicely and your boss remains comfortable. And it's not so much just for their comfort, but it's also because, number one, I guarantee you will do this a lot sooner than you think. Number two, you want to do it again. You don't want to be a victim of, holy crap, I don't know about this Brian guy because he keeps finding bad guys in the network, and that just turns into a lot of butt pain. So you want to make it somewhat acceptable for them. And so this is more of just, thinking through all those things so that you can set up a long-term path for success. And a lot of it is, again, just making sure that your boss is in the loop, that you do no harm in your day-to-day actions, and then thinking through all this stuff while you're not in the middle of everything. But one of the biggest things, I think, is you don't want to go to your boss and say, hey, I found this information about this potential bad guy in this particular section of our company, and then have your boss say, whoa, 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 you're not supposed to be looking at logs within that section of the company for whatever reason. It's a very good idea, and I speak from experience, of understanding what your boss's level of ambiguity is, to understand what auspices you might be under, what expectations the boss might have of you, and quite frankly, what's within limits and what's not. Because again, this is not a wild, wild west, cowboys in the network, trying to just create havoc. This is ultimately trying to make sure that your home field is defended, that your team moves on to the next, throughout the championship, if you will. So, making sure that you don't shoot yourself in the foot is a very key part of this. So, once you've understood your environment, you've set a path for success, the next is understanding who your opponent is. Now, if you're strictly in the offensive side, the obvious other way to look at that would be, okay, who am I going to go against? And typically, that is driven by what? What's the biggest driver of all of this? Exactly. Yes. When you boil it all down, when it comes to actual drivers for why people are doing things, people who are sane, then it is exclusively money, regardless of what level you're talking. If it's intellectual property, company to company, if it's secrets that a organization might have, those can all be quantified into money. When it comes to things like, you hear about this stuff ad nauseum, but like the Target breach, and those things that are just widely open in the news, then it's very clearly about money. I mean, seriously, timing it so that it's during a busy shopping day and the most number of credit cards are going to be stolen. Yeah, it's absolutely about money. But depending on what vertical that you're in, you may attract different levels of adversaries, if you will. This is where I have to be careful. So depending on what you have, and I'll leave it up to your imagination, of whatever company you currently work for or want to work for or whatever, that has some intellectual property that someone else desperately wants, or it has monetary value. That alone will cause people to come in and want to get it. If you can understand what that information is that your company has, that is golden. And why do you think? Well, if you know what it is that people are after, guess what you can do? You can watch that stuff. There's I don't know if I got it up here. Yeah. So I forget exactly who said it, but basically the idea is if you try to protect everything, you protect effectively nothing. You've watered down what it is you can do. Again, if your company has intellectual property that will cause your company to suffer greatly, perhaps not exist anymore, if that's gone, that should absolutely be the number one thing that you're protecting. It's a little bit more than that, though. It's understanding what that data is, understanding how it's used within the organization, who has access to it, who does not, using that information, and this is the actual home field advantage, the asymmetrical piece. You know who should be touching who should not be touching that data. You know what that data is. You know where it resides. You know how it's backed up. You know everything about that intellectual property that is at the core of your company. Understand that the adversary that's out there is going to try their best to understand this as well as you do. We are very, very smart, very patient. We will come up with new ways to figure out how to get at something, how to pick locks. It's ad nauseum. It's just something I think within our mentality to take challenges and want to just break them. I don't know why. I have it. I'm sure all of you have it. But that patient determination and intelligence is what really defines who is coming after you. You hear a lot about script kiddies and that sort of thing. When you're doing things with a team like I'm talking about, that type of attack, you don't worry about that crap. That's sort of hygiene. That's just firewalls and stuff that happens within the network. What I'm talking about is at another level. It's looking at all of that stuff and pulling out what is important. I could care less about a script kiddie or a click jack or whatever. If I spend my time worrying about those things, then I lose focus on what's important. And unfortunately, what's important, if you've done it well, your due diligence in figuring it out, it's not going to be one or two things. It's going to be an almost unmanageable handful. However, the fact that you're focusing all of your attention on that handful of items is going to be what makes you famous in your organization, because you are covering the concerns of your boss and your boss's boss, et cetera, and having a lot of fun doing it. The other piece that's a bit difficult is monitoring what's leaving your organization, so exfil. Think about all the different ways you can exfil data from a network, from physical to send it out FTP, plain text, port 80, SSL, Tornet, et cetera, stuff that you're all very familiar with. This can be a very difficult challenge, finding what's leaving. This also goes back to planning and setting yourself up for success. Is as you've looked at logs and you see the types of indicators that are there, it's also noticing what's not there, looking for the gaps. What are the things that I cannot see? I cannot see, for instance, things going out SSL through the proxy. I can see the endpoints, but I have no idea what's there. It behooves you to bring whoever the decision maker, and if it's you, then awesome. It's a question of, do you have a checkbook? But bringing information to those individuals that's meaningful and something that will actually help your cause. So think about this. You've got an individual within an organization who's responsible for acquisitions of systems. That individual is basically set up this thing that you just entered into, where you're looking at logs from disparate systems and linking it all together. Just from a past performance is an indicator of future performance. That's not necessarily the entity that you may want, if you have your say in this, continuing to purchase things like something that will inspect SSL. Wouldn't it be a lot better if you rolled into your boss's office and said, hey dude, so here's where we're blind based on our infrastructure and maybe some information I've gotten from you of how much we could spend. I think this is the thing that we should get, because it hooks into the rest of the systems, or it exports JSON, or whatever, so that you become an active participant in your own environment. This is the whole matrix thing where you start defining your own environment. It's recognizing it. This is, in effect, this is hacking. This is taking a job, looking at it like a system, and now breaking it up into pieces, looking for inputs, outputs, and now hack. That's all it is. But that last one is, like I said, is easier said than done. This takes some thinking through, some pretty good understandings of the expectation for things to be pulled from your network, what the avenues are, et cetera, et cetera. There's not a one-size-fits-all solution for this. Then the fun begins. So you understand your environment, you got the right team, you got your boss on your side, maybe you've gotten your boss to procure some infrastructure that's going to help you have a much cleaner picture of what's going on. Now you can do some really, really cool stuff. And we were talking about this at dinner last night, and it's one of those, I'm not a psychology expert, but it pulls at something very, very base within us to, for whatever reason, hunting is fun. Now, not necessarily the PETA, animal cruelty type. I mean, it's the chase is what the excitement, not the catch. It's the pitting yourself in a game-like environment with someone who maybe you're equal, or hopefully someone who's better than you. That's my assumption. I don't want to catch a script kiddie. I want to catch somebody who's actually writing exploits, who's got the basic assembly down to do things that have not been done before. It's the catching 0 days, not by just heuristically seeing it on the wire or whatever, but looking at the, what are its behaviors? Within my environment, if I know very well what the expected behaviors are, and I see something operating outside of that, then I can quickly hone in and start to see some random DLL injections into pieces of code that are rarely used on a Windows 2008 server, as a for instance. It's doing things that others will view as black magic, but when you know what's really involved, it's kind of comical. But running scripts to go out and look for the start run items from everybody, all the systems in my network. Show me what the start run items are, bring them back, throw them into a MySQL, sort them, which ones are one-ofs. For services, give me the hashes of all the XEs. Think about it in a 40,000 node enterprise. And you have 5 individual XEs that come back with 3 different hashes. You think that's a pretty strong indicator that maybe those are interesting files? Yeah, absolutely. It's very easy with that kind of scenario set up to find persistent threats within your network. There's basically an unlimited number of ways to go out and hunt within a network. What I recommend is starting with the basics, and then as those peter out, if you will, then moving on to maybe some more advanced things. But again, and I'll hit on this one more time, what you don't want to do is make things worse. And what do I mean by that? So there's 2 cases, 2 large cases that I'll touch on. And one is So say you've got your team set up with experts and whatnot, but what you will not be responsible for, if you do this correctly, is the day-to-day maintenance of the Exchange server, right? You want to have somebody on the team who's very cognizant of what the Exchange server does, how it operates, how it should be configured, et cetera, et cetera. But you are not the administrator, and you need to be very cautious of any of the scripts or whatever that you are running with inside your network that might cause issues. Because the way to go down is the Exchange administrator will get contacted by somebody saying, oh my God, this thing's broken, she's not gonna know, and then they're gonna freak out. And then when they ultimately find out that it was you, yeah, that's not a good scenario at all. That will end your team. The other aspect, besides keeping the administrators just recognizing that there are other people involved in this and not just me, keeping them appraised, but then there's also some very specific things that you should do to make sure that you aren't outfoxed or you aren't simply a higher level victim, if you will. How many of you are familiar with the fire alarm attack? Is that? It's maybe something I just made up. I don't know. So you're familiar with watering hole attacks, right? Where you get everybody to go, that you figure out where people go, and then you set up some scripts, some code. A fire alarm attack is to pull the alarm on a building and then have your attack focused on the response, as in the emergency responders. Perhaps that's your target. People exiting the building, maybe that's your target. Or in the case of this, it's maybe I'm going to send a spearfish or just a general fish into this organization that's going to not really implant any malware that does anything spectacular. It's just going to be kind of random looking. I'm going to cause the users to have issues so that their next step is to call the administrators. What do administrators do when they're helping their customers look at issues? Maybe they'll log into the computer with their own creds. Maybe that's what I really want them to do, so that I can now have their creds, now offline, out of band, and I'll come in and use them a different way, right? So understanding that that is perhaps one of the things that your adversary may do, it's working against a potentially infected machine, but doing it with some intelligence. It's the administering your network from a protected, trusted enclave that does not trust what you're administering, right? That's the whole scenario of if your Active Directory that you own gets just owned at the root level, how do you mitigate against that? How are you going to fix that? You're going to shut off the entire system for X amount of time? Rebuild? All fresh accounts? No, you're not. If you were to get your company to buy off on that, they might give you a 24-hour window. And crap, I don't want to be the guy that's responsible for doing all that stuff in 24 hours and having it set up right. So, these are the things that you think about in advance, and maybe you set up a safe zone or a safe harbor that you admin from, or you do your hunting from. It's maybe my desktop is not on the network, but I run virtual machines. That the only thing that will ever touch the internet is a VM. And yes, that's not perfect, but it does preclude a lot of the lower, the currently in the wild type things that you would see. If you were to do that using, within your own network, then you can adequately prevent someone from stealing your own creds, and using it against you. It's using PSExec, running a system non-interactive so that you don't expose your credentials. And of course, this is all having the knowledge of how the current version of Windows credential editor, whatever it is, what it is linking together to pull out your single sign-on and the salt. It's understanding all that stuff so that you can continually protect how you're doing this kind of thing. But again, you want to go at this with a large measure of smarts. It's what everybody here already does. I mean, it's the things you already think about, the things that already interest you. So I'm about 30 seconds behind, so we'll see if there are any questions. Please let me know, but just to, again, go over what we talked about. So it's understanding your environment. It is knowing who your adversary is as much as possible. It's the not waiting for a system to tell you that you've been hacked or that there's been an intrusion. It's the going out and actively looking for that stuff on your own. And then it's taking this whole idea, owning it, and again, I guarantee you, if you were to roll into an organization with the skills you already have, with some of the things you've already been doing, but doing it for the other side, that is a very, very lucrative option that's out there. And then the other side of this is, it's also good to know, if you are the adversary, that what I've talked about is the very, very tippy top of the iceberg. There's so much more that you can know within the networks when you know what you're looking for, that it becomes, it's almost a little boring with some of the folks that you find within networks, very much unbeknownst to them. Then it becomes an exercise of, okay, who do I tell this to, and how's that going to work out, and I don't want to get involved in that kind of stuff. So that's where you just have a good relationship with your boss, pass the information, and move on. Prosecutions, that kind of thing will happen however they happen. And it's very easy to become, I mean, hell, if I could do it, anyone here could do it. It really is that easy. So any questions? Any questions at all? Besides what my favorite color is. Yes?
1 second.
Have you actually seen it done, like in a bigger company?
I've done it.
How big was the company?
So everything that I've talked about here is a methodology. When I was in the U.S. Air Force, very, very large. This is, yeah. So in companies, I have not, but one of the things, and this is a very good point, one of the things that when I mentioned the team, you have the team that you have with you right there, but then it's also, who do I know, who have I met at a conference or whatever who's very intelligent on SCADA, ICS, the brute forcing of hashes, that kind of thing. So I keep those contacts, and I know individuals who are doing much the same thing within, yes, larger organizations, smaller organizations. So this is not, in defensive side, this is not, rocket science or anything extraordinarily new. Though surprisingly, it's I find not a lot of people view it maybe and maybe it's because of I have more of an allegiance, or not allegiance, but I don't know the right way to say it. I would more be sitting in the audience typically, right? Totally legal, of course, but yes. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, but my point is that when I look like at a big corporation, that's my background.
Mm-hmm.
It's silos. So you don't.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, so you get like physical security, application security, pen test, application security, don't talking to pen test. How can you actually work like that?
So-
And that's why my question was.
Yes, and you hit on an absolutely perfect point. You know, when I mentioned that this is like hacking, it is. This is, you know, what you're trying to hack is in a good way, but that old school mentality of siloed operations, of sections not talking to each other. You know, it's the, you end up socially engineering your own individuals. I mean, it sounds kind of manipulative, but whatever. I mean, it's, you know, it's all for the good. You know, so for instance, say you figure out that the most important data that your company has is some spreadsheet that the CIO is stuck with, that just loves. And there's like 5 people who manage the spreadsheet. In an organization of 50,000 people, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna go to that office, I'm gonna schedule a meeting, maybe not a meeting, I'm just gonna go in and meet the individuals. We're gonna have a conversation, just a very cordial, I'm gonna figure out what they know about security, what they don't know, and I'm gonna help fill in the gaps so that I am comfortable when they get an email that looks strange, the only thing they're going to do is send me that email, right? Think about that. You have just done, within a 30-minute conversation, you have provided so much insulation for that particular piece of data that your company has that you will not be able to replicate that with $1 zillion worth of machinery to figure out that, yes, this email coming to this individual has these particular attributes and that may be bad, and just inform the users, you know, get them on board. You know, it's looking at things like that, understanding how the system works, understanding how the pieces work together, you know, in a bureaucracy, if you will, and then bending that system to your will, reaching through it and getting done what you need to get done. Yeah. So there's no prescribed, you know, it's very much, I actually see that as an enjoyable piece of it though, right? You know, it's understanding the ununderstandable. You know, it's social engineering, but making friends at the same time, right? Any other questions? Any at all? If I can't answer it, I won't.
Actually, we are out of time. But you can find Brian outside somewhere here. I hope he will be during the whole day, the conference. So you can ask him other questions. And thank you very much, Ran, for a very interesting lecture. Big applause.
Thank you.